In the last section, we wrote out a test for our virtual property of post count. In this section, we're going to flip back over to our user schema and try to make this test pass. So right now it's failing, and we definitely want to fix it up so it'll actually pass. I'm going to start off by flipping back over to our user.js model. So inside of here, we already have a property on our user schema called post count, and that's supposed to be a number. So what I am saying here is that we no longer want to have a post count property that gets saved off to our database. Instead, we want to, on the fly, figure out what the post count value should be. So anytime that we are using a virtual property or something that should be computed on the fly, we will not define this property inside of our schema. So I'm going to take this property and I'm going to delete it. So we're not going to have it anymore. Now, the instant I do that, we start getting into a little bit of quandary inside of our project here. If you recall, we were using that post count property back inside of our update test file. So I'm going to update or open update test. So inside of here, we had that post count property. Here it is right here inside the before each. And then if we scroll down a little bit, we can find the test that we wrote where we were testing the post count with the increment operator. So we can no longer use this increment operator with this post count thing because we don't really, we want to remove the idea of saving this post count to our database. So this test that we have right here is no longer valid. It doesn't really make sense anymore. I still want to have an example inside of our entire test suite of the increment operator, however. So I'm not going to delete this test just yet. I think that what a good strategy would be to do is maybe we will introduce a new property besides post count, and we will come back in a little bit and fix this test up. So I still want to have a test around increment, but post count isn't going to work anymore because post count isn't being saved to the database. So we'll just bench this test for now, come back later on. To make sure that our test suite is not ran with this test, we don't want to have a failure popping up. We can just omit this test being ran whenever Mocha runs by changing it right here into X it, like so. So by adding an X in front of the it right here, Mocha will interpret this as meaning, okay, it looks like they've got a test here, but I guess they're probably still doing a little bit of work on it, so I'm not going to execute this test. So by putting the X in there, the test won't run and we won't see any failures pop up, which is definitely what we want to have happen for right now. Okay, so back to our virtual property. We've now deleted the schema key of post count inside of here, and so it's now time to define our virtual property. To do so, we're going to add a couple of new lines underneath the user schema, and then inside of here, we'll say, look at my user schema. I want to add a virtual property called post count. So the thing that you're going to recognize here or notice really quickly is that we are not defining a virtual property inside of our user schema. We add all of these virtual properties as separate declarations on the user schema. By calling virtual, we are telling Mongoose that we want to define a virtual field. Okay, so we just call this with post count, and that tells our user schema, okay, we expect there to be a virtual field somewhere, but we still have to tell it what to do whenever a user actually accesses this thing. To set a function on this thing, or to kind of define this virtual property, we are going to chain on another statement, a .get. And I'm going to pass into this thing a function. I'm going to specifically use the function keyword. So this is really important. Notice that I'm using the function keyword right here. I'm not using a fat arrow function. So let's put it on our semicolon. All right, so this looks good. And I'm going to save this file. I want to talk a little bit about two topics. First, I want to talk about exactly what this kind of get right here is implying or what it's going to do for us. And then I want to talk about this function, why I'm passing in a function keyword instead of a fat arrow function. I'm going to flip over to a diagram really quick to help understand exactly what we're doing when we define this get thing on this virtual property. These virtual properties work by using the getter and setter features of ES6. Whenever we define a getter with a virtual property, which is what we're doing right now, we can then reference a property on our model like joe.postCount. Whenever we reference joe.postCount, something is going to happen that is very dissimilar from the type of JavaScript that we're used to. So with JavaScript that we are really used to, whenever we say joe.postCount, JavaScript is going to look at the object Joe, it's going to look at the property post count, and it's just going to say, okay, here it is, here's whatever's on that property. When we define a getter, however, the behavior is a little bit different. So when we define a getter on Joe for post count, whenever we reference joe.postCount, instead of just giving us back the value of post count, Mongoose and JavaScript are going to work together to very quickly run a function that we define. Inside that function, we will return some computed value, and then that result that we return will be returned or basically produced by joe.postCount. So what I'm kind of getting at here, the big confusion, the big kind of crazy thing that we're not going to be used to, is that when we refer to joe.postCount, we are going to be running a function even though we did not actually add in any parentheses or anything like that. So I would like to define this getter on here and then figure out, I want to do a quick test on this thing at the command line without any tests or anything like that, just to kind of get a better feel of how that works. So let's take a quick break. We'll come back, add in some logic to our get function right here, and then we're going to test it out at the command line. So I'll see you in just a second.